My guide told me never to enter the hospital alone. 20 minutes later, he vanished inside it. And against my better judgment, I went in after him.
The assignment came from a European magazine I had worked with before. A long-form feature, nearly 6,000 words. The topic sounded strange at first. What happens to nature after humans disappear completely? The story focused on a place called Black Hollow Zone, a massive abandoned exclusion territory sealed off after a reactor disaster nearly 4 decades earlier. Most people imagined it as dead land. They were wrong. In the years without people, the forests had swallowed entire towns, wolves roamed freely, elk moved through empty streets, birds nested in collapsed factories. Nature had returned faster than anyone expected. Radiation still existed, of course, but animals feared hunters more than contaminated soil. That was the angle of the article. I spent 3 weeks researching ecological recovery before arriving. By the time I crossed the military checkpoint into the zone, I already knew the basics. But research papers don't prepare you for silence. The towns inside Black Hollow felt frozen in time. Apartment blocks stood empty beneath overgrown trees. Roads cracked apart under thick roots. Rusted vehicles sat untouched where they had been abandoned decades ago. Even the air felt wrong. Too still. My guide met me at the checkpoint shortly after sunrise. His name was Anton. Tall, broad shoulders, mid-50s maybe, calm in the way experienced people become after surviving dangerous work for too long. He carried a radiation counter clipped to his belt and spoke very little. "Stay on cleared paths," he told me as we drove deeper into the zone. "Don't touch dust-covered surfaces. And never wander alone." That was the entire briefing. The first location was an abandoned helicopter graveyard several kilometers north of the old city center. Rows of military helicopters stretched endlessly across a cracked concrete field. Most had rusted apart. Some still had shattered cockpit glass reflecting the gray morning sky. I crouched beside one of them to take photographs while Anton watched the radiation levels nearby. My camera clicked steadily. The scene looked unreal, like a battlefield abandoned after the end of civilization. Then my radiation counter beeped softly. 1.9 microsieverts, higher than normal. "Back up," Anton said calmly. I stepped away. The reading dropped immediately. He nodded once. Hotspot. That was how he explained everything. Short, efficient, emotionless. We spent the next several hours exploring the abandoned city of Velgrad. The amusement park stood empty beneath thick fog. Ferris wheel frozen forever above silent streets. Bumper cars rusted into the floor. I photographed everything. At first the place fascinated me, then slowly, it began to feel wrong. Not dangerous, just watched. Every building seemed to stare back. Every dark window felt occupied. Anton moved slightly ahead of me everywhere we went, checking rooms before allowing me inside. At some point I stopped questioning it. I trusted him completely. You don't argue with someone who knows how to survive a place like this. That night we returned to the temporary housing unit near the southern checkpoint. The room smelled of old concrete and industrial cleaning chemicals. I sat on the bed reviewing photographs from the day while rain tapped softly against the windows. Hundreds of images. Most useless. Some excellent. Then I reached a photograph taken from the 4th floor of an apartment building overlooking a tree line at the edge of Velgrad. At first it looked normal. Empty street. Forest beyond it. Then I zoomed in. Something stood between the trees. Tall. Too tall. Its shape looked wrong somehow. Not a wolf. Not a human either. I pushed the image to maximum zoom until the pixels blurred apart. Still there. Watching from the shadows. I stared at it for nearly a minute before finally closing the laptop. I told myself it was probably a trick of light. Nothing more. But that night, Lying awake in the darkness of the housing unit, I could not stop thinking about the figure standing silently between the trees. And somewhere deep inside me, I knew I had photographed something that should not have been there. The next morning, Anton already had coffee waiting when I entered the kitchen. A folded map sat on the table between us. Today's route had been marked in red ink. Most of the locations were abandoned apartment blocks and government buildings near the northern district of Velgrad, but one location sat circled separately. Sector 12 Medical Center, the old hospital. "You stay close there," Anton said while finishing his coffee. "Building is unstable." I nodded, but something about the way he said it bothered me. Not fear, recognition. Like he already knew the place too well. We arrived shortly after 9 a.m. The hospital stood at the edge of the district, surrounded by dead trees and cracked pavement. Large sections of the exterior had collapsed inward over the years. Broken windows stared down at us like empty eye sockets. Even outside, the atmosphere felt different. Heavy. My radiation counter clicked softly as we approached. 1.4. Normal for the zone. Anton checked the entrance carefully before turning toward me. "Wait by the vehicle," he said. "I clear the inside first." That had become routine. Every building we entered, Anton checked ahead alone. Usually he returned within 5 minutes, so I waited beside the Jeep while reviewing photographs from yesterday. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I looked toward the entrance. Still nothing. At 15 minutes I radioed him. Only static answered. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. At 20 minutes, I entered the hospital. Inside smelled like wet concrete and mold. Long corridors stretched through darkness beneath flickering gray daylight, filtering through dirty windows. Graffiti covered the walls. Collapsed ceiling panels littered the floor. I called Anton's name. No answer. My voice disappeared into the building and died instantly, swallowed by silence. I climbed the staircase carefully. Second floor empty. Third floor empty. Then halfway down another corridor, I heard something below me. A scraping sound, slow, wet, like something heavy dragging itself carefully across concrete. "Anton?" I called again. Nothing. Then my radio crackled suddenly. For half a second I heard my own voice echo back through another radio somewhere deep beneath me. And underneath it, another sound. A sharp, horrible crunch, followed by silence. I followed the sound downstairs. The farther I went, the quieter I became without even realizing it. At the end of the ground floor corridor stood a half-open office door. Dim gray light leaked through the gap. I pushed it open slowly. Anton lay on the floor. At first my brain refused to understand what I was seeing. There was too much blood, too much damage. The room looked like violence had exploded inside it. And in the far corner, something moved, low to the ground, large, still feeding. I couldn't focus on its shape properly. Every time my eyes tried to understand it, my mind pushed the image away. Wrong limbs, wrong proportions. Nothing about it looked natural. I froze. The creature remained perfectly still for several seconds. Then slowly, I realized it hadn't noticed me. Not yet. I stepped backward carefully. One step, then another. I pulled the office door shut without making a sound and backed into the corridor, breathing through clenched teeth. My entire body shook uncontrollably. The realization hit me piece by piece. The radio transmission, the noise, Anton's silence. Whatever was inside that room had found him when his radio activated, and now I was trapped in the same building with it. I forced myself to move. The exit stood at the far end of the main corridor, 40 feet away. I could already see daylight outside. The Jeep waited beyond the entrance. Freedom. I ran toward it, then stopped instantly. The metal entrance frame had been crushed inward, bent together, twisted like soft aluminum. The gap remaining was barely wide enough for my shoulders. I shoved against it desperately. Nothing moved. Then behind me, a sound echoed through the hospital. Movement. Fast movement. Something had heard the noise. I backed away from the entrance immediately. The sound grew louder, heavy impacts somewhere below the staircase, coming upward, searching. I ran deeper into the hospital. On the second floor, I hid behind an overturned metal cabinet inside a ruined office. Dust floated silently through pale gray light. My breathing sounded deafening. Then footsteps passed outside the room. Not human footsteps. The sound resembled multiple limbs dragging unevenly across concrete. Slow, deliberate. The creature stopped outside my door. The air pressure in the room changed slightly. Dust lifted from the floor near the entrance. I covered my mouth with both hands to stop myself breathing loudly. Several seconds passed. Then the sound continued down the corridor. Only then did I notice my radiation counter, 2.8 microsieverts, far higher than before. I stared at it while listening to the creature move farther away. Slowly, the reading dropped. 2.6, 2.4, 2.1, and suddenly I understood something horrifying. The radiation wasn't coming from the building. It was coming from the creature itself, and now I had a way to track where it was, or where it was getting closer. I stayed hidden for nearly 20 minutes. Every time the creature moved closer, the radiation counter climbed. Every time it moved away, the numbers dropped again. 2.4, 2.1, 1.8. It was tracking the thing perfectly. That realization changed everything. I no longer moved blindly through the hospital. Now I listened, watched the counter, waited. Eventually the reading settled back to 1.6, background level. The creature had gone lower into the building, maybe the basement. I moved carefully into the corridor again. The hospital had become darker while I hid. Afternoon light now stretched long shadows through broken windows. I needed another exit before nightfall. Fast. The rear side of the hospital had an external fire escape connected to the second and third floors. If I could reach it quietly, I could climb down into the rear courtyard and escape through the forest. Simple. At least in theory. I reached the second floor fire door slowly, checking the counter every few seconds. 1.6. Still safe. The lock mechanism had rusted badly over the years. I found an old steel pipe nearby and used it carefully for leverage. Slow pressure, no sudden force. The lock finally shifted with a soft metallic click. I froze immediately. Listened. Nothing. The counter remained steady. I opened the door carefully. Cold outside air rushed into the corridor. For 1 second, relief flooded through me. Then the staircase collapsed. The entire metal structure tore away from the wall beneath my feet with a deafening scream of twisting steel. I barely threw myself backward before the stairs dropped into the courtyard below. The sound echoed through the hospital like an explosion. My radiation counter jumped instantly. 3.4, then 3.7, coming fast, very fast. I hid inside the nearest room just as something rushed up the staircase nearby. This time it moved differently, not slowly, not searching, hunting. The sound raced through the corridor toward the fire door. I pressed myself flat against the wall beside the doorway, unable to breathe. The creature stopped outside. I heard the ruined staircase groaning softly in the wind beyond the open fire exit. Then silence. Several endless seconds passed. Finally, the sounds moved away again. Slowly. The counter began dropping. 3.2, 2.8, 2.4. I almost collapsed from relief. But another problem had appeared. The sun was setting. And according to Anton's notes earlier that morning, darkness inside the zone was dangerous. Very dangerous. I returned to the 4th floor to think. That was when I remembered Anton's bag, still downstairs beside the office where I had found him. I told myself there might be supplies inside. Maps. Keys. Anything useful. Truthfully, I think I just didn't want to leave him there alone. The counter showed 1.5. Safe enough. I forced myself downstairs. Every corridor felt smaller now. Every shadow looked alive. When I reached the office door, I stopped breathing entirely. The room remained silent. I pushed the door open carefully with the steel pipe. Anton's body still lay where I had seen it, but the creature was gone. I grabbed the bag immediately and backed out without looking around the room again. Upstairs, fast. The counter climbed slightly as I moved. 1.8, 2.0, not much time. Inside the bag I found water spare batteries, emergency medical supplies, maps of the zone, and a rugged electronic tablet. The device still worked. I opened it quickly. Several folders appeared on screen. Most were labeled in another language. One folder had only a single word. Archive inside were years of notes, photographs, radiation records, security camera footage. I opened the newest file. The translation software struggled badly, but enough words appeared to understand the meaning. Entity remains inside lower levels during daylight. Another line. Avoid noise at all costs. Then another. Radiation spikes correspond directly to movement. My hands tightened around the tablet. Anton had known. For years. He had been studying this thing, monitoring it, containing it. And suddenly another line appeared on screen. Does not leave building while sunlight remains visible. I looked toward the windows outside. The sky had darkened into deep blue twilight. Only a few minutes of daylight remained. Then I noticed one final note. Short. Separate from the others. Almost hidden. Secondary maintenance hatch behind basement corridor. I stared at the words. A hidden exit. The counter suddenly jumped. 2.7. Then 3.1. The creature was moving upward again. Fast. I grabbed the bag and ran downstairs immediately. Not toward the main entrance. Toward the basement corridor. The corridor at the rear of the hospital felt colder than the rest of the building. At the very end stood an old wooden basement door hanging slightly open. Darkness waited beyond it. And beside the wall, near floor level, I saw it. A small rusted metal hatch almost completely hidden beneath mold and dirt. I dropped beside it immediately. The latch barely moved at first. Rust fought every inch. Behind me, the counter climbed higher. 3.4. I forced the latch upward harder. The hatch opened suddenly with a horrible metallic shriek. At the exact same moment, something exploded upward from the basement. The sound was inhuman. A violent scrambling impact racing toward the corridor. I threw myself through the hatch head first. Stones scraped my shoulders as I dragged myself outside into freezing air. Behind me, the basement door slammed violently against the wall as the creature reached the corridor.
I pulled my legs free and sprinted across the rear courtyard without looking back. The hospital behind me shook with movement. I rounded the corner toward the front gate and saw the Jeep exactly where we left it. I jumped inside, hands shaking violently. The engine failed once, then again. Behind me, something moved inside the hospital entrance. Fast. The third ignition finally caught. I slammed the Jeep into gear and drove through the open gate just as the last sunlight disappeared beyond the forest. I never saw the creature leave the building, but in the rearview mirror, I saw movement watching from the hospital entrance long after darkness swallowed the road behind me. And to this day, I still don't know whether Anton had been studying the thing inside Black Hollow Zone or feeding it.